Good morning, everyone. Rick Dickert up in Skyfox. We are watching a very organized group of students across the Los Angeles area march towards City Hall for a lunchtime rally. These students walked out of their high schools, and there's at least 6 of them, including James Garfield High School, Roosevelt High School, Mendez High School, Esteban Torres High School, Wilson High School, and Lincoln High School. This group stretches several blocks across the city, crossing over the First Street Bridge, or heading westbound on First Street. Very organized, very orderly. They've been staying on the sidewalk. There are adult chaperones there assisting the kids, making sure that they abide by all the stop signs. There have not been any attempts to get on the freeways at this time. It's been very peaceful. And again, just students here, thousands of them from our vantage point up here in Skyfox, heading west on First Street, crossing over the Los Angeles River there, coming from the Boyle Heights area. And these kids have marched several miles here from their school towards downtown Los Angeles, and it is a very hot day in the city. Yet again, right now the temperature already 84 degrees, but we're going to be near 90 for that lunchtime rally. This is all to protest the newly president-elect Donald Trump and his views on immigration and deportation of undocumented citizens. With that said, these students left their classrooms, and it is an unexcused absence. I know that our mayor, Mayor Garcetti here in Los Angeles, urged parents to speak to their kids to make sure that they did execute their First Amendment right to speak up about their thoughts on the newly president-elect, but to try to keep them in school.
Word had reached Saul Alinsky about this jerk out there in California that was sent out to study the Mexican-American situation and always wound up trying to organize it. His ears began to flap right away because he was looking for an organizer to go to Butte, Montana and fight on Anaconda Copper. I told him I didn't want to go to Butte, Montana because how much more significant would it be to be able to do somewhat the same thing in the largest concentration of Mexican Americans in the Western Hemisphere outside of Mexico City. He finally said, I have heard of an organizer might fall in love with somebody in the neighborhood, but this is the first time that I've ever known that some organizer has fallen in love with a whole ethnic group. He asked me how I plan to organize and build power. He said, what are you going to do? Get together all the Mexican organizations and the church and so forth, get them all together and set up an organization of organizations like I did back at the Yards Neighborhood Council? And I said, well, no, because it would be more or less like the tail wagging the dog. The organizations in the East Side are absolutely without power. You know, the church isn't going to want to have anything to do with it, more or less, because it's on the same basis as these other powerless groups. So what are you going to do? And I said, well, put on an extensive, intensive membership drive on a one-to-one basis. The cream of that crop can then become deputy registrars of voters and go from door to door all throughout the East Side, building the power, the voting power of the Spanish-speaking people.
I believe that when you do organizing, what you leave behind in terms of not only accomplishments, but in terms of the leadership, because this is what the CSO did, is it went down to the bottom and it brought up people, you know, and this leadership emerged. So when you have such stellar graduates as Eduardo Roybal, Cruz Reynoso, Cesar Chavez, Herman Gallegos, you know, and you go down the line and you see all these people that came out of this organization, it's quite stunning that the Chicano leadership of California came out of this grassroots organization. I can't say the same, or I don't know, I can't really, to my mind, I can't think of any person that has come out of this other model, which is, you spend a lot more money, I think, in organizing than what CSO did. The other thing, too, I think it was very important, the one thing that Fred Ross did, is that he immediately got people involved on the civic action part. Voter registration immediately, get out the vote immediately, you know, confronting your public officials. One of the greatest things that I think that I learned from Fred and that I say to people in my organizing that I'm doing now is politicians work for you. You pay their wages, you know. They're accountable to you. They're responsible to you. And that is a lesson that people have to learn in our country if we're going to make a democracy work. So if anything, I think that and I'm calling it the Fred Ross model of organizing, and the Cesar Chavez model is that you bring people from the grassroots and they take power, they take action, and they're the ones that make things happen. And the leadership then emerges out of that.
We had been very active with registering. I remember clearly, very, very clearly, I used up 2 cars. Of course, they were not brand new, but I used up 2 cars driving back and forth. I'd always take 2 or 3 people to help register, and then also to help Roy Ball's campaign by putting up posters. And this was working. Now this was working from about 6 o'clock. 6 in the afternoon till about 2 o'clock in the morning, putting up signs. And that was exciting too, because we would get stopped by policemen, and we would say, okay, we're sorry, we'll go home, we'll quit, and we would drive a half a mile away and start putting more signs up.
One of the things became very imperative and recognized as dramatically important would be to get them to register to vote. And the churches all cooperated, and we got people, first of all, confirmed as registrars, and then they'd come and played outside the church on Sunday at all the masses, before Mass and after Mass. And the priest would announce at Mass, be sure and register to vote. If you haven't registered, register today. Stop after Mass and register. And that went in all the, all the churches in the East LA area were all were committed, absolutely committed. And Sunday after Sunday, and that made a difference, because that helped get the Mexican American people aware of the fact that they did have a voice, and that unless they spoke publicly together by voting, that there would be no changes. And that began.
Tony decided to have Fred Ross in the house. Fred Ross came to the house to talk to him about the Industrial Areas Foundation. Even Linsky came a couple of times, because he was the money bag. I used to call it money bags here. And because nobody got paid at CSO. We didn't even have enough money at the beginning to have a house. My house was the office. And we took messages and everything. And then we started having raise funds. We used to donate the stuff, work on it, and buy our tickets.
Take a trip in my mind, see all that I've seen, and you be called a beast, and a human being. Fuck it, 'cause there's not much I can do. There's no way out. My screams have no voice, no matter how loud I shout. I could be called a lowlife, but life ain't as low as me. I'm in juvenile hall, headed for the penitentiary.
All the kids you see here in orange, they're being prosecuted as adults. Today, over 200,000 kids are sent through the adult court system each year. To find out who these kids are, a group of filmmakers went to East Lake Central Juvenile Hall in Los Angeles. It's the largest juvenile facility in the United States, and it's filled with the most violent and dangerous juvenile offenders. They randomly chose 12 of these kids to participate in a video production workshop. Their charges range from robbery and assault to murder.
we had to now say the schools are not working. They're taking our taxpayers' money, the hard money that our fathers and mothers worked for, and not returning it in any way. We're the only ones losing out.
A massive walkout to shut down the schools was what we somehow decided on. Change wasn't going to come from within, it had to come from without.
How many people were going to do it and who was going to do it was, I think, decided that morning for a lot of us, and me included.
And at 9 a.m., while we were all sitting in class, everyone was aware this was going to happen.
The signal was going to be blow out, blow out. And so we went around the school and said, hey, blow out, blow out. So then all of a sudden kids began to come out of those classes and the teachers didn't know what was going on.
My friends would go down the hallway saying, walk out, walk out. And I remember looking at them and thinking, my God, am I really going to do this?
And all of a sudden, the chanting began, Chicano power, Chicano power, ya basta, we demand change.
In the morning, as I walked into the school, as the bell rang for the kids to go to school, into the classroom, out they went. Kids from all over, different hallways and everything else, bam, out in the streets, with their heads held high, with dignity. It was beautiful to be a Chicano that day.
4,000 students walked out of 5 Eastside high schools that day. By the end of the week, 16 schools were affected, with more than 10,000 students out in the streets.
There is a legacy of activism in our community that began with the students. Near the end of the 60s, a time of revolutionary change in U.S. history, a generation of young Latinos in East Los Angeles began awakening to the problems that faced our community. On March 8, 1968, close to 4,000 students walked out of their classrooms to protest an unjust and unbalanced educational system that favored schools on the West Side. By the end of the week, more than 10,000 students from the East Side schools had joined the student blowouts, decrying the issues that plagued them as students: the tracking of Latino youth into low-wage jobs, the lack of resources, and the overcrowding. The students from Garfield demanded that 2 new schools be built.
And at that time, the school was maybe 2,500 students. They were saying our school is overcrowded. Imagine that. 35 years later, schools are now 5,000. We would be happy for the school to go back to 2,500 students.
My name is Alberto Palacios, and I have been teaching at Garfield High School for slightly over 30 years. When we go to conferences, I've been to Boston, I've been to Albuquerque, and we meet with colleagues from other states, other districts, and when we tell them that we have 5,000 students in our high schools, in some of our high schools, when we say 5,000, they always say, no, we meant just the school, not the district. No, that is a high school. I mean, they just can't believe it. How can you have 5,000 students? How do you do it? How do you run it?
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Mesa, and I'm a junior at Garfield High School and also a member of Inner City Struggle. As a student at Garfield High School, I see most of these problems on a daily basis, like walking to class and seeing literally a sea of heads around you. It's like you barely even walk to class, and just like seeing the lack of resources in the classroom due to overcrowding is just really, really bad. And I think the only way to relieve all these problems is to build a new high school. I've seen my older brothers drop out of high school. I've seen most of my friends drop out of high school. Like, from our freshman years, we used to hang out, like, it was like 40 of us, 30 of us. And by my sophomore year, just a year later, there was like 10 of us left. So, like, out of a whole group that we used to hang out, it's only 2 people out of, like, this large amount of group, which is like 30 or 40 kids. Well, we really want student input and teacher input and like administration input. You know, it's like our school and our community, and we're making positive change as we go along. So, thank you. And
I've seen reports where it states that 80% of our students go on to higher education. 80%, above 80%. It turns out what they do, they give out a little card to students that says, "What do you plan to do?" And the students fill it out. Go to college, go into the military, go to work, and go to college. And you turn it in. That's it. And that's where they get the 80%.
1 out of 16 students go into a four-year university from Garfield, which is one of the lowest rates of any school in the country. 1 year alone, only 72 students went on to a four-year university from Garfield High School. And people are like, oh, that's a lot. But now when you have 5,000 students, and even add that more, like if the students actually even graduated, you actually would have had 9,000 students.
Stop that.
We want to do something. We want to take a stance against this because we know that things are screwed up and things are not set up, you know, to like help us go to college.
Really loud with them, you know, really make it clear.
It's why I think it's so important that there are institutions like Inner City Struggle that does give people that are poor and don't have access to a lot of resources, the skills, the ability, and resources to take on institutions like education and government.
A regular library, or what we call the strike school library, because everything has to do with the curriculum that we use as far as for training and workshops and stuff like that, and also for political education with the students.
It's like we spend like more time with Inner City Struggle than with our own families.
Yeah, my mom tells me that I never see you anymore. She's like, it seems like you live over there, not here.
We're ignored a lot of the time, and I think for all of us, you know, it's important that we stand up and we want to make a real change in our community.
East LA, they had selected the Belvedere Park area, and it's a perfect choice, perfect selection. It already has a playing field, and we're going to tear down the county structures that are on there and build a school.
Buenos días, me llamo Lisette Patrón y soy parte de un grupo de estudiantes de la preparatoria Garfield. Y estamos aquí para pedir su apoyo como miembros de la comunidad. Necesitamos una nueva escuela inmediatamente. Estamos pidiendo al distrito escolar que construya una nueva preparatoria al lado del Parque Belvedere.
Everybody agrees that we need and want a new high school for the Garfield area. But nobody wants it in their backyard. And that's the problem right now, the conflict.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Somos miembros de la comunidad y estamos queriendo agarrar apoyo porque queremos construir una nueva escuela. Ahí al lado del Belvedere Park. Pues, las escuelas acá están bien sobrepopuladas y queremos agarrar apoyo de los miembros de la comunidad.
Había mucha gente que está contra la construcción de esta nueva preparatoria, especialmente al lado del parque. Pero juntos, trabajando juntos, vamos a lograr la nueva preparatoria y no perder una primaria o una secundaria. Y para eso estamos aquí.
My name is Benny Size. I'm with St. Belvedere Park Committee. This is the largest park in East Los Angeles, and that's why this park is very valuable to the people that live here.
It does good for our mental health, and it does good for our physical health to have parks. And a very, very important part of not only our educational experience, but also our physical well-being. We cannot afford to lose any space at all for the community. Look the richness here. Look how much is available and being used.
It's within the neighborhood. It's accessible to transportation. The kids stay in the neighborhood. They don't have to go to different parts. They don't have to go outside their neighborhood, go to school. They stay within it. And it also doesn't displace housing, and it has very low impact on businesses.
This is our basketball court. This will be removed, and it would be put down to the west of me. And this would be made into an Olympic-sized swimming pool with 8 lanes for school use only.
And, at first we're like, oh, maybe they have some good concerns. We're like, well, maybe, because, they were saying, oh, there's going to be, too much traffic. We're like, oh, those are good concerns. But then as we begin to go to the meetings and they go to those hearings, we begin to say, they're saying all this anti-youth stuff. Like they're saying that, oh, if we build a school in our neighborhood, crime's going to go up.
Anti-war demonstrators protest U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War in mass marches, rallies, and demonstrations. Central Park is the starting point for the parade to the UN building.
President Richard Nixon came to office in 1968, promising to reduce American troops in Vietnam. Instead, he widened the war. Opposition to Vietnam was taking hold in the Chicano community.
We had reached the point where we were going to say that, hey, we don't have to prove ourselves, feel a inferiority complex, and go out and serve in that war.
We're protesting against the discriminatory draft laws that give deferment to all the Anglo middle class people of this country and make the heaviest burden of the war fall on the poor, fall on the Mexicano.
People were becoming expert at getting out of the war, and so as more and more middle-class people that could afford lawyers began to get deferments, the draft boards filled up their quotas with more of the poor, and particularly Mexican-American.
Mexican-American casualties were disproportionate to their numbers. In the Southwest, Mexican-Americans made up 12% of the population, but accounted for almost 20% of the region's deaths in Vietnam, according to many sources.
There was some dissent in our community about whether or not we should be protesting against the war, but it was generally a generational division. Young people were pretty much against it. Students were almost completely all against it. At the same time, I have to say that there was a very strong military tradition in our community.
Mexican Americans had served with distinction in the U.S. military since the Civil War, and during World Wars I and II received the highest military honors.
So there was and is a deep respect for the military in our community because it was one of the gateways, one of the paths that people took to gain an education, to gain some sort of self-respect. The problem was that the only places where we could go forth and claim a part of being American in this country was by spilling our blood.
And the fatality rate is not consistent with the fact that we have so many inconsistencies as far as social problems here in Los Angeles, in our own nation, our own country.
If you were asked to risk to die for something, what is it you believe in, and what do you owe to that country?
You know, why should you fight over there when our main battle's over here right now?
This is our land. This is our land.
It's easy for the establishment to say, aren't we all the same? Aren't we all Americans? Well, obviously we're not. Otherwise we wouldn't be in the revolutionary process that we are in now.
What, in your estimation, is the most serious problem?
Los Angeles Times columnist Ruben Salazar had been following the Chicano movement ever since the Denver Youth Conference. Chicanos, in turn, were coming to respect his frank commentary.
And when he goes in the army, he goes to...
Salazar now joined Chicanos in vocal opposition to the war.
Many of us are quite grateful that I, for one, probably would never have gone to college if I had not been in the army, and thanks to the GI Bill. But the fact remains that we seem to lose more of our people in Vietnam in proportion to the rest of the population.
A Chicano moratorium committee was formed to build momentum against the war.
The idea came up, why don't we have a national meeting and start developing how we nationally do something against the war? So let's have our own Chicano moratorium.
They held anti-war rallies in Chicago, San Francisco, Austin, and Houston, with a major demonstration slated for Los Angeles in August 1970. A moratorium march. Afterwards, Corky Gonzalez and others hoped to convene the first meeting of an all-Chicano political party.
In many ways, the Moratorium March was the apex of the Chicano movement. And it was a moment in which we all felt that we had to speak. And the war was the single most important issue that was confronting the country at the time.
On August 29th, 25,000 to 30,000 Chicanos gathered in Los Angeles to protest the war in Vietnam.
There was a couple getting married at the St. Alphonsus Church. They timed their wedding so they could come right out of the church into the march. Ruben Salazar was there, and he came up right in the middle of, right up Whittier and Atlantic, in the middle of the street, gave me a big thing. Well, you did it.
After a 4.5-mile march, the demonstrators gathered at Laguna Park.
Everybody was there greeting their friends, greeting their families, people that relatives they may not have seen in a long time that they happened to see August 29th.
During the afternoon rally, a disturbance erupted at a local liquor store.
According to the police story, some people went into a liquor store and walked out with some six-packs and went towards the park. And supposedly the shop owner called into the police. The police came and started chasing the people that supposedly took the beer, and the people ran into the park, and then the police wanted to go get them, but the people in the park wouldn't move out of the way, so they had to call more police and declare it an illegal assembly. That was their pretext that they used, you know, to break up a demonstration of 25,000, 30,000 people against the war in Vietnam in East LA. So you had a panic, you know, you had a stampede, a human stampede.
A lot of destruction took place on both sides. The police called it a Chicano riot. The people called it a police riot.
Demonstrators found refuge in nearby homes or in local businesses as police forced people out of the park and into the streets.
I was in the restroom with little children that were there. They were very scared. They were crying. The mother had never seen such a thing.
Deputy Sheriff Thomas Wilson responded to a report that an armed person was in the Silver Dollar Bar on Whittier Boulevard.
When I approached the doorway, I knew I had a tear gas projectile in the weapon. I wanted to get something inside, and I wanted to get it inside quick. I attempted to aim up towards the ceiling to bounce the projectile to the rear of the bar.
Some people inside never heard the orders to come out. Among them, Ruben Salazar.
Sometime later, after the gas cleared, the information was received that the victim, Mr. Salazar, was inside the location, had been injured. The officers investigated and they found that he was dead and was lying approximately 20 to 25 feet inside the front door.